Welcome to Lost Caverns of Ixalan, Week 1. A lot of these are going to be decks that caught my attention. I have not had a chance to play them all, clearly, but I do think that there are some really interesting builds, so I hope you enjoy. The first one we've got here is a Budget Caves build by Saffron Olive, and it's got a couple of rares. It's got Shigeki, and the Colossal Sky Turtle from Neon Dynasty, which is very helpful for doing these infinite loops, right? So you can dirtle into the to your heart's desire, to your heart's content, with these two cards. And but the shell of it is all from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and majority of it are uncommons and commons. So we've got a Get Lost, which is a rare that I think you can also tweak. I don't think it's necessary, but I do think this is an interesting removal that Lost Caverns of Ixalan brought that is going to see some play in Standard. Because removing a game-winning threat to give them 2 map tokens is pretty good. We've got Go for the Throat, which is a classic control piece, right? Glimpse the Core, which is a new one that allows you to search your library for a basic forest card and put it onto the battlefield, or return target cave card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So one of the things with Shigeki is that you can return it to your hand, reveal the top 4 cards of your library, and you may put a land card into the battlefield tapped and put the rest into your graveyard. So Shigeki also helps us dig to find more cave synergies. And then we've got Bat Colony, which is an enchantment from Lost Caverns of Ixalan that when it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 bat token with flying for each mana from a cave spent to cast it. So if you cast it with 3 caves, you're looking at creating 3 1/1s, and then whenever a future cave enters the battlefield, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. We've got Spelunking. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and then you can put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield to just keep triggering those cave synergies. And if you do put a cave in, you gain 4 life, so it can help you stabilize against aggro. And then lands you control enter the battlefield untapped, which is the biggest drawback with the caves, is that they're all tap lands. So if you have Spelunking, then that solves that problem. And then we've got the real card that is like glues the whole strategy together is Calamitous Cave-In. And this is a sorcery that deals X damage to each creature and each planeswalker for 3 and a red, where X is the number of caves you control plus the number of cave cards in your graveyard, right? Which is why it's like nice to get the Shigeki to fill it with a whole bunch of caves. The other payoff is Cosmium Confluence, and this one is a sorcery where you can search for a cave, put it into the battlefield tapped, or you can put 3 +1/+1 counters on it. You can do any of these more than once. You choose 3. So if you already have an untapped cave in play, it just becomes a 9/9 with haste. And then you can also use it to destroy target enchantment if you're up against, an annoying wedding announcement or a virtue. And then we've got the Gargantuan Leech, which is a 5/5 for 7 and a red, but it costs 1 less for each cave you control and each cave in your graveyard. You get a 5/5 lifelinker. So you can get this out. It's kind of like Tolarian Terror in the mono blue tempo deck. And so I definitely think, I don't think this deck is just a meme, right? I do think that it has some legs. And I'm going to show you guys here in a second the not budget build. And you can kind of see between the 2 versions what I think makes up the core. And then, we've got these hidden lands, which are cave lands that enter tapped. They all have the ability to tap for 4 and whatever color they are to trigger a Discover 4, which is a mechanic from Lost Caverns of Ixalan that flips cards up until you hit something that costs 4 or less, and then you can either play it or put it into your hand. And we've got the Cavernous Maw, which is a man land as long as you have 3 caves in your graveyard, or 3 or more caves in your graveyard, plus the number you control. So in this deck, it should be pretty easy to do. Forgotten Monument allows all of your caves to tap for rainbow mana at the cost of 1 life. And then we've got the Sunken Citadel, which is also a cave, and you get to add 2 mana of the chosen color to activate abilities of land sources. So the second one on the list is another version of caves, and this will be like it's arguably just about as inexpensive. It's just choosing to play different cards, right? And this one's going to go for a Tali instead of doing the Shigeki's Sky Turtle loop. And you know, this is a good payoff in any deck, right? And so this one's like taking advantage of the fact that the Glimpse the Core and the Cosmic Confluence and Spelunking, that they can just help you ramp to your high 7-cost card, right? So we still have the same. We have the Gargantuan Leeches, the Confluence, the Cave-In, the Spelunking, the Bat Colony, the Glimpse the Core, and the Go for the Throats. And this is deciding to go for the Iron Crag instead, to even increase getting to Atali faster, right? And so no Get Lost, which was what I was saying, that you don't need it. You can kind of like plug in what you think synergizes well with the shell. And this one is a very similar mana base, but because we're not limited to the amount of rares, playing the Restless Cottage is one of the best manlands from Wilds of Eldraine. And so being able to go heavy on that is fantastic. And then I also like this edition, right? Including the Captivating Cave. It's a good mana fixer. It's a cave. And then the +1/+1, the 2+1/+1 counters can work when you run out of other things to do. So I think this is an interesting build. And notably, they did this version decided to cut blue. So this is one that I found on MTGA Zone from Skura. And most of the decks to this week are going to be from Skura. So, and now for a little less meme, a little something that I know is tried and true. Mono White Humans is the best of one deck, at least before the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And we got a couple of new tools that I think are going to be interesting to check out. So we got Warden of the Inner Sky, which is a 1/2 for 1 that can, as long as it has 3 or more counters on it, it has Flying and Vigilance, and you can tap 3 artifacts or creatures you control to put a +1/+1 counter on it and scry. So not only, you have to do that as a sorcerer though, it's not instant speed. So we get a threat that grows over time and helps us fix our lands. So if I compare this to the Mono White Humans list that I covered in week 10, the last week of the Wilds of Eldraine, 4 copies of Hopeful Initiate instead of just 1. We've got the 3 new Wardens. We've got no Lunarch Veterans, so cutting the Lunarch Veteran in lieu of this new 1-drop to check it out. Also no Skrelv, and no Spellbook Vendor. And we've also got this new card, which is the Sanguine Evangelist, and this one's cool because it grows the board. But the cards that it's bringing in are not humans, so it's kind of like Adeline, and it helps build Adeline, I should say. But then it has a little bit of non-synergies with the Coppercoat Vanguard, which wants you to have as many humans as possible in your deck. So I'll be really curious to see how this one plays. But being able to go wide, and then every time Battle Cry, when you attack, you get +1/+0 on all of your creatures. So this is kind of like a good way to get in additional damage. Decided to bump up the Mishra's Foundry to 3 copies, a Gonjo up to 2, and go down 2 planes, so running 23 total lands instead of 22. Another list that caught my eye was Boros Aggro. This is also for best of 1. And we've seen kind of a couple of different token builds, some of them that are leaning into the Gleeful Demolition, where you can blow up an artifact and spawn a bunch of 1/1s and kind of do the Imidane's Recruiter. And this is taking a different route than that, but similar, just like cheap creatures, leaning on the Raging Battle Mouse to be able to, your second spell costs 1 less, so you can chain multiple early drops. And then we've got the Sanguine Evangelist here for the Go Wide board pump. And then we've got a new one here, which is Anam Pakal, Thousandth Moon, which is a 1/2. Whenever you attack with 1 or more non-gnome creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on Anam Pakal. Then create X 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens that are tapped and attacking, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Anam Pakal. So between these two, you kind of get like a more of a board wide, go wide strategy than what Imidane's Recruiter was, but you get less of a board pump. And so kind of curious to see what this one's doing, because it's very much like we're playing a mono white shell, right? We have the Recruitment Officer, we have the Resolute Reinforcements, we got Adeline, we got Knight Errant of Eos. Yeah, just go wide, pressure your opponent. GG's. All right, the 5th one here is Azorius Soldiers. Azorius Soldiers has been another one that's the top performing best of one. The top three, I think, are Mono Red, Mono White, and Azorius Soldiers. And notably, Mono Red did not get a lot from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. So that one, I stand by the one that I posted last week on week 10, or 2 weeks ago, because I had to do the draft guide. But this one, we've seen this before. You know, this is at least, especially a top performing shell in best of 3. So if we compare this to the list that I covered in week 10 by Tyism, we've dropped the Fairy Mastermind, we've dropped the Harbin Vanguard Aviator down by 1, so we've got 2 copies instead of 3. No Werefox Bodyguards, and no Virtue of Loyalty. And instead, we've got a new card here, Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel, and this one is basically, I've been seeing it in every blue deck. Right, people are excited about this one. We get a 2/1 flash flyer for 2, and then whenever it deals damage to a player, you put a chorus counter on it, and you get to loot. You get to draw a card, then discard a card. And if there are 4 or more chorus counters, the card that you discard, you can play without paying its mana cost. So if they don't use a removal on this, and it's getting repeatable damage through, you eventually just completely outvalue your opponent. And then we've also got the 4 copies of the Sanguine Evangelist, and because, again, this doesn't have the human synergies, this doesn't have the soldier synergies, it's partly why, you know, knock Harbin down to 2 copies instead of 3. And we've also got the little tweak to the lands, not much, right? So dropping 1 Otawara here and 1 Plains, for 2 of the Restless Anchorage, which is, we've got the rest of the set, the rest of the man lands have come in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And so the white-blue one is, you can tap 1, a white and a blue, to make it into a 2/3 flyer that creates a map token whenever it attacks. So I think this is, you know, it's gonna, we're taking out 1 blue and 1 white to put in 2 blue and 2 white. It's gonna help fix the not getting screwed on one color. And then if we are up against control, this seems like a pretty good threat, and should be able to help us close out the game. Okay, the 6th one here is Azorius Control, and we've seen, you know, at the end of week 10, at the end of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, we were starting to, at the end of Wilds of Eldraine, my goodness, we were seeing some Esper control lists that were doing quite well in best of 3, and so we got some interesting tools for Azorius Control, and the question is whether or not black is actually worth playing, or if we should just do the blue-white, right? I mean, really what we're missing out by not playing black is Rafine, right? But in a super hard, super controlling shell, it's not necessary. So if we compare this one to the one that I covered in week 4 of Wilds of Eldraine, we've got some similarities, right? It's kind of like we're subbing out the cards that were the version of it in Wilds of Eldraine for the ones that we got in Lost Caverns, and seeing how it does, if it performs better. So we've still got the 4 copies of the Wandering Emperor. We don't have 4 copies of Jace, though, so we don't have an alternate win con, which I feel like is a little bit of a weakness in this deck. Just if we do bump into the end and they remove Wandering Emperor, I think this deck might struggle to close. But what they've decided to do is do the Chromhost Seed Shark, and pair it with Leyline Binding, and increase the amount of lands that we're running. So we're running basically everything but red. So it's kind of like Domain meets Azorius Control, and Domain Ramp has kind of had a control aspect to it. So you kind of see where they're headed with this, but this is definitely something that, like, you could take these out, right? You could take the Leyline Bindings out and the Chromhost Seed Sharks and tweak the lands back to just strictly being blue-white, and just find an alternate win strategy. I mean, you know, so but yeah, so we've got 4 copies of Get Lost, which I think this is going to be just a really good white removal tool. We're still running the 4 copies of Make Disappear, even though there is a problem with the counter spells, as I'll cover shortly here in the next one. We've got Confounding Riddle, which is the new counter spell that allows you to counter. You can counter target spell unless its controller pays 4. Or you can use it as an impulse and look at the top 4 cards of your library and put one of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. We've got the Memory Deluge, up to 3 copies from 2. We've got Out of Air, and this one is replacing the Urza's Rebuff. Kind of give you some versatility, so you can do a 4-cost hard counter or a 2-cost counter, double blue counterspell if it is a creature. Really curious to see how this one performs in Standard. Only 2 copies of Sunfall. The old one in week 4 was running 4 copies of Depopulate, if I remember correctly. And so just 2 copies of Sunfall. I feel like maybe this should go up a little bit. But, you know, I trust the deck builder here. And we've got Restless Anchorage, which gives us similarly, you know, is a good late game threat to finish out the game. Gives us some other way, some other means of winning other than just Wandering Emperor. So, and notably 28 lands versus the 26 lands that the week 4 version was running. So it might need a few, like, tweaked down a little bit for best of 1, but Control does want to hit its land drops and is really sad when it doesn't. So curious to see how this one goes. All right, 7th one this week is Dimir Tempo, and the reason why this is sad because the deck that I always point people to when they're starting out, when they're playing Magic, is the mono blue Tempo deck, and I think that the mono blue Tempo deck is dead because of Cavern of Souls. And Cavern of Souls allows you to play a creature type, and then each creature that you pay with that mana, you can't counter it. So this is adapting mono blue Tempo into Dimir and relying more heavily on removal instead of just counterspells. So if we compare this to the mono blue Tempo deck that I covered in week 2 of Wilds of Eldraine, we've cut the Hornlock Whales, we've cut the Tolarian Terrors, and we've added the 4 copies of Malcolm, which I think if you're going to be in blue, you're going to see Malcolm. We've got down 3 copies of Consider, as well as Fading Hope, and as well as March of Swirling Mist. So all of the like disrupt, so that you can, you know, bouncing their stuff with Fading Hope and then countering their play was part of how the mono blue Tempo deck worked. So if you can't counter what they're playing, bouncing it with Fading Hope is much worse. And then we've also gone down 3 copies of Sleight of Hand, as well as Spell Pierce. Once again, because the counter spells not working as well is a problem. And we've gone down 1 copy of Thirst for Discovery. If we're not going to lean so heavily into filling our graveyard for the Tolarian Terrors, there's less of a reason to go down that path. Notably, this is running 4 copies of Impulse, which was the standard before it was replaced by the Moment of Truth. And I think that if we don't care about the graveyard, then Impulse makes a lot more sense than the Moment of Truth. And Haughty Djinn still has really great synergies in this deck, is still a finisher, is still kind of like the necessary rare, our win condition, and then we're bringing in black, right? So we've got the 3 copies of Cut Down, and I think we could even go lower on this, because I think that because of the way that Cavern is going to play out, is we're going to see more ramp into stuff that can't be countered. And I'm a little bit concerned that we're just not going to see a lot of small drops, at least in best of 3. I think that like Domain Ramp is looking like it just got even better. So something to keep an eye out is like, how often are you actually coming up against mono white and mono red, where this is really good. Last I checked, mono red and mono white were still the most common best of 1 decks, so probably don't cut it yet. We've also got Go for the Throat, Gix's Command, and the Virtue of Persistence. And these are not budget friendly, right? Like, so it's still a relatively cheap deck, and we'll see how it plays out. I really hope that mono blue isn't dead, but maybe we can kind of like figure out a way to keep it alive. Oh, and then the lands are just tweaked. So we've gone up to a total of 25 instead of 22, because we're aiming to play more expensive cards rather than capping off at Flow of Knowledge. And splashing, you need to have a little bit more lands in your deck to avoid the possibility of getting screwed, especially when you're aiming to play both Double Pit Blue and Double Pit Black. So the lands are just here to also not be budget friendly, but increase the likelihood that we won't get stuck on the wrong colors. Okay, and the last kind of like competitive one before we could just get into straight brews is what happened with Domain Ramp. And I think Domain Ramp got stronger, which is, it was definitely a top performer already, especially in Best of 3. And in Best of 1, you're just trying to destroy Mono White and Mono Red's dreams by casting Sunfall. So, if we compare this one from, I think it was week 6, where I covered Domain Ramp, the last one that I covered, we've gone down 1 copy of Go for the Throat, deciding to run the 2 copies of Courier Briefcase, and I am curious about this one. It allows us to do a turn 4 Sunfall, so it really depends on the speed of the format, but I've seen people cut the Courier Briefcase. It is good against the aggro decks, right? If you're in Best of 3, I think there's some reasons to not be running the Briefcase. Especially with, like, you know, some people have gone up to like 4 copies of Up the Beanstalk and you just really try to outvalue your opponent. But against aggro, I think it is good. Not running the 1 copy of Depopulate, which I want to see. I think 1 copy of Depopulate is actually pretty good, because it is just so devastating to Mono White and gives you like 5 board wipes, right? Invasion of Zendikar gone up to the 4 full copies of it. There were a couple of versions of the Domain Ramp that were just running 2, and I think that I would do that. I would probably go with the Invasion of Zendikar on 2 and add a Depopulate just for Best of 1. Notably, this one is also not running the single copy of the Mountain that we started to see a little bit near the end of Wilds of Eldraine, and is running 25 lands instead of 26. So I think I would be down 2 copies of Invasion of Zendikar, 1 Depopulate, up 1 Mountain. But, you know, it's personal, right? It's personal preference. And then we did get the Cavern of Souls, right? Where is it? There's Cavern of Souls. This is the card that makes Mono Blue cry, right? It comes into the... you choose a creature type. In this one, you choose Angel so that you can get an uncounterable Atraxa as well as an Archangel of Wrath. And then it taps for 1 mana of any color if you are spending it for the creature type that you chose, and that spell can't be countered. So, damn, right? Like, the plan of like countering your opponent's Atraxa is no longer an option. Which is, I think this is the one that's single-handedly going to change Standard's meta the most, and you can see that, you know, it's reflected in the card's price. Like, last I checked, it was like $150 or something like that. I mean, it's like, it's nutty. Everybody wants a copy of the Cavern of Souls. And sorry, my head was in the way, but... All right. And now for some fun builds, right? So for less of the climbing to Mythic as quickly as possible, and this one's a little bit more just for, you know, having fun, which is an important part of Magic the Gathering. And so this one's Orzhov Angels, and this one is leaning heavily into life gain, being really good against Mono Red and Mono White. And so I think it'll be really good against the predominant 2 decks in the Best of 1 meta. It's going to struggle against board wipes, right? There's no answer here to Sunfall. There's no countering the Sunfall. It's just kind of like, well, let's hope we don't end up against that deck. But it does have some interesting things going on, and we got a couple of we've got a couple of synergies that tools that we got available in Lost Caverns of Ixalan. First one is Amalia Benavides Aguirre. Can't roll my R, apologize. It's a 2/2 with ward, pay 3 life. Whenever you gain life, it explores, and then destroy all other creatures if its power is exactly 20. Now, I don't think you're actually going to get it to be a 20/20 and do it, but like, it's a fun challenge anyway, right? We've got the 2 copies of Get Lost, which is just, I think if you're going to be in white, you're probably going to see this card. It's just fantastic removal. And then this is really the card that, like, it says M19 here, but we got a copy of this in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and this one is the reason why Angels, I think, is going to become a thing again, right? Orzhov Angels has been Orzhov Vampires and Orzhov Angels kind of comes and goes, right? And Resplendent Angel, I think, is going to bring it back, because you get a 3/3 flyer. At the beginning of each instep, if you gain 5 or more life this turn, create a 4/4 white angel token with flying and vigilance, and it itself can become a 5/5 flying lifelinker. But this deck is set up to gain life anyway, that I don't think it's necessary, right? We've got Archangel of Wrath, we've got the Steel Seraph, which are also angels, good at gaining life. We got the Inspiring Overseer, which is good for the card draw. Voice of the Blessed, which goes in every life gain deck. Giada, which has got really great Angel synergies, gives them a +1/+1 counter when they enter the battlefield. Lunarch Veteran, every creature that we play gains this a life. And then the last but not least, Metropolis Reformer. And this isn't a new card. This is just one that I have yet to craft because I haven't really checked out the Angels thing, but I do think that you would want it if you're doing the Orzhov Angels plan. And it is a 2/3 flying vigilance angel for 3, and it gives you hexproof, not the creature. You get hexproof, which could be really good because I think there is a mono red burn deck that's leaning off of the mythic red god. That means everything that pings for 1 will then ping for 4. I'm not sure how good it is yet, but at least giving yourself hexproof means they can't target your face, right? And then whenever it is dealt damage, you gain that much life. So another life linker, good for blocking, can attack without, tapping. And then the thing that really makes this whole thing viable, whole thing work, is Cavern of Souls, right? Being able to pick Angel as the creature type and then make everything uncounterable, as well as fixing for our mana, is fantastic. And we've already got the Restless Fortress from the Wilds of Eldraine, and then just kind of your standard fixing, Takenuma, and a Gonjo. All right, number 10 is Simic Merfolk, and similar, we're getting these tribal decks because of Cavern of Souls, right? So being able to pick Merfolk, make it so that they can't be countered, and fixing for our mana, and so the thing with Merfolk is that you kind of have like a Azorius Soldiers vibe, where you're planning on leaning on the flash abilities of some of your Merfolk, while disrupting your opponent's plays. So some of the lists that I saw were running counter spells, but because of the Cavern of Souls, I went with the creature heavy type. And the card that we got that is kind of tying everything together for the Merfolk strategy is Tishana's Tidebinder. And this is a good answer to Shieldred, right? And if my hypothesis is correct, that we're going to see more ramping into 4-drops, and we're going to see like turn 3 Shieldreds more, being able to counter the ability of Shieldred and then have it not be a problem for the rest of the game is quite appealing. And then it's a 3/2 flasher. We've got what's the other? There's another one in here that is the Voldalian Hexcatcher is the Merfolk Lord, and this one gives all of your other Merfolk +1/+1. And you can sacrifice Merfolk to counter non-creature spells, but it's a flash and can do a giant board pump. And we've got the Cenote Scout, which is a new one from the Lost Caverns, allows you to explore. We've got the Jadelight Spelunker, which is a Merfolk that explores for X times when it enters the battlefield, so it kind of fits anywhere on the curve. We've got the Deep Root Pilgrimage, which is an enchantment that we got in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Whenever one or more non-token Merfolk you control become tapped, create a 1/1 blue Merfolk creature token with hexproof. And we all know how annoying a hexproof creature can be. And this is the gas. This is the gas that we got from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. We get the Subterranean Schooner, which is a 3/4 vehicle that can crew for 1. And then every time that it whatever crewed it, then that creature explores. And Explorer lets you, you reveal the top part of your deck. You either put the land into hand, or if it was a non-land, you either put it into your graveyard to keep it on top, and gives the creature +1/+1. So it's just a good way to grow the board. We've got Deep Root Wayfinder. This is an old Merfolk, and it deals the combat damage to a player or battle. You get to surveil, and then return a land from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, so it can help us ramp. And then we got the Merfolk is the signpost of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan for Simic, and it hasn't been particularly good yet in draft, but I think it's got its place in a standard tribal deck. And this one just gives you a bunch of boons for exploring, which Merfolk are doing quite well in the Lost Caverns. It itself gets a +1/+1 counter when something else explores, and then if you explore a land, instead of putting it, you'd put it into your hand, but then you can also put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. We've got the Voldalian Mindsinger, which is a Merfolk wizard for you can pay it with kicker, and then if you pay it, it can come down as a 6/6, and when it enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature with power less than it for as long as you control it. And then Sentinel of the Nameless City is annoying, right? Especially in limited. We get a 3/4 for 3, which is a good body. It's got vigilance, and it's a merfolk. And when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you create a map token, which helps you further do your exploration synergies. And then we got Deep Fathom Echo, which is a 4/4 merfolk. I constantly think this thing has flying. But when it at the beginning of combat on your turn, it explores, and then you can have it become a copy of another creature you control, which gives you some fun synergies to copy one of your busted creatures on the battlefield. And then, just Simic lands. We've got the Restless Vinestock. All right, and the last brew that caught my attention was the Fight Rigging deck, and we've had Fight Rigging around for a while, right? This is like the Fight Rigging deck has always been somewhere in like tier 2 or tier 3. It hasn't been a top performing deck, but I think there might be a chance that it could be doing well, right? So we got the Ancient One in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, which is an 8/8 for 2. It can't attack or block, but it's still an 8/8 for 2, which means that we can play a turn 3 Fight Rigging and trigger it immediately. And so we just need to okay, what delicious things can we hit with our Hideaway 5 that would be absolutely back-breaking to get on turn 3? And we've got plenty of options, right? Ghalta, Stampede Tyrant is a 12/12 trampler. When it enters the battlefield, put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield, so you can just play your entire hand on turn 3. Seems okay. We've got the Skull Spore Nexus, which is another one we got from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. It costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So, like Ghalta, right? It would cost 2 green. And then, whenever one or more non-token creatures you control die, create a green fungus dinosaur creature token with base power and toughness equal to the total power of those creatures. So, like, if it's only got 12 power, then it comes back as a 12/12. And then it has the ability to tap 2 and tap it, double target creature's power until end of turn. So you can make Ghalta into a 24/12 trampler that then, when it dies, it comes back as a 24/24 that you can then make into a 48/24, right? So very fun synergies there. We also got the Pugnacious Hammerskull, which is straight up a 6/6 for 3. You need dino synergies, otherwise it gets a stun counter every time it attacks. But it can sit back on defense, right? And it's another great target to hit with your Fight Rigging if you can't find the Ancient One. We got the Shakedown Heavy. Similarly, it's just a good target for Fight Rigging. We've got a little bit of removal with Go for the Throat. Intrepid Paleontologist allows us to ramp. And it allows us to ramp, but because Fight Rigging is on 3, it's a little bit less important to ramp to 4 than it is its second ability, which allows you to exile a card from your graveyard, and if it's a dinosaur, then you can cast it from your hand, from your graveyard with a finality counter on it, which means that it has to be exiled when it gets killed. We got Invasion of Ixalan. This one is just really good dig, helps you find your Fight Rigging. And then it can flip it, but I don't think you usually need to, right? But you can flip it into a 4/3 trampler, and then whenever you cast a spell, it gains indestructible until end of turn. And then we've got Up the Beanstalk, because once we start cheesing in these free things off of our Fight Rigging, they end up drawing us cards so that we can continue to find even more disgusting threats to dump all at one time with Ghalta. And we'll get into the best of 3 decks a little bit later, just once we've actually seen how the top tournament winners are performing and kind of see what's happening at that level. So most of my stuff today has been on best of 1, but I did want to give a nod to the final decks of the Wilds of Eldraine. So this one does not have any cards from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, but we need to bid farewell to Wilds of Eldraine, and I figured this would be a good way to do it. And this one is Gruul Combat Tricks by Mazzaro, recently hit Mythic in best of 3. And the plan with this one is we go for playing with Monastery Swiftspear, Cacophony Scamp, and Questing Druid. These 3 are our biggest threats that grow every time that we cast a spell. And then the reason why it's called Gruul Combat Tricks, right, is we're trying to hit it with something like Giant Growth, Audacity to give it trample, and Monstrous Rage. Where are you? Yeah, Monstrous Rage. Basically, we're just trying to pile on all of our spells into something that gets bigger every time that we cast one of those spells. Maybe a double striking Picnic Ruiner, right? Like just lots of potential threats. Cacophony Scamp can sacrifice itself to deal damage equal to its power, so we just need to get this one to 10 to like one hit our opponent. And yeah, just a whole bunch of just like direct damage. So if you like Gruul aggro and you want to kind of go off with an off meta pick that might catch your opponents off guard, I think this one's pretty cool. And it does my heart good whenever I see this, right? We're running 1s and 2 drops, right? This deck is fast. We want to win the game before mono red can win the game, right? And so we're playing Thran Portals to make it happen, because this was before there's no Restless Land, right? Like the fixing hasn't come in yet for it did in Lost Caverns, but it hadn't at the end of Wilds of Eldraine. So I think you could improve upon this mana base, but I think this is a fun one to it hit Mythic. I believe in it. I think you could grind this in best of 1 for sure. And it looks like a fun deck. Sorry, I forgot to cover the best of 3 sideboard, because it is the one best of 3 deck, right? So we've got Strangle, 3 copies of Royal Treatment, the Witchstalker Frenzy, In the Festivities, Lithomantic Barrage, Urabrask's Forge, and Bosejo Who Endures. And deck number 13 is Boros Soldiers by MTGA Draft Lab. And this was another one that hit Mythic. This one's a best of 1 list. And this is another one that doesn't have any new cards from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, but I thought it was kind of doing something new and exciting. And I think this one could also be fun to explore. This one is basically mono white, but we're deciding to add red for Baird, which helps us go wide. And so we've got the recruitment officer, we've got the Valiant Veteran, we've got the Dusk Legion Duelist. So like some interesting soldier synergies. And this one we haven't seen this one a lot, but one of the sub themes of this deck is +1/+1 counters. And so whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put onto Dusk Legion Duelist, draw a card. And so that gives us some nice dig. It pairs nicely with the Homestead Courage to give something a +1/+1 counter. And as well as Siege Veteran. Siege Veteran is a soldier that gives a +1/+1 counter. So kind of curious why, maybe it just does. Siege Veteran alone isn't enough. So the fact that we're running the Homestead Courage is enough to make this work. Because you don't usually see it in like mono white and in Azorius Soldiers. But we've got Myral, excellent soldier synergy. And another one that's just an absolutely busted card that we get to have for a little bit longer is Angel Fire Ignition. So this one puts 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It gains Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink, Indestructible, and Haste until end of turn, and then you can flash it back to do it again. So this card can absolutely just win you games as long as your opponent doesn't fizzle your target in response. And so usually you gotta be careful about what your opponent's playing and kind of play around it a little bit. And then we've got Archangel Elspeth, which you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, so it fits into the +1/+1 counters theme. It also, you can create a 1/1 soldier that has the soldier synergies and lifelink to help stabilize against aggro. And then the one thing that this does lack is protecting your stuff, right? So if you're going to do the Angel Fire Ignition, at least you can do the Surge of Salvation in response, which you and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn and prevent all damage that black and or red sources would deal to creatures you control. The only downside with this is that it doesn't have an answer to Sunfall, right? So you need to just beat up your domain decks before they hit the Sunfall and just wipe the board. But I think it's definitely worth checking out, right? And we've got 1 copy of the Lantern Flare. I've seen this a couple of times. Being able to deal X damage to target creature or planeswalker is nice. Gives you this little removal capability, and then you're Boros, so you can pay for the cleave cost, right? So you have a go wide, so you don't have to pay the cleave cost, but if you need to, then you can because you're in Boros and you can do the X. But anyway, that was an interesting one. Also running Thran Portal, right? Which I think you could improve upon this just by including the Restless red-white land, right? But maybe Thran Portals, maybe it's necessary because the red-white land would come in tapped. But, so, hope you enjoyed my favorite picks of week 1 of Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I'm really excited to see how the format shapes. Remember to hit like and subscribe. I try to publish near daily Magic the Gathering content. Some of it limited, some of it constructed. And, you know, if you're looking to help support my endeavors, you can hit the join button and be a member on YouTube. You get early access to videos and a couple of other perks. And, you know, you could do other options. You can come say hi to me on Twitch, whatever, you know, right? It's all appreciated. And just watching to the end of the video is fantastic. So thank you. And I hope you are enjoying the Lost Caverns of Ixalan as much as I am. And, yeah, I'll look forward to seeing you all next week when I'll cover some more, probably get into some actual best of three constructed decks in Standard as well. So take care, everybody, and maybe I'll see you on the ladder.